Okay, so I promised a Christian David that I would record my replies to this. So here you go, David.
What does this term duck refer to? Does it refer to Huey rather than Louie? Or does it refer to Dewey instead of Huey? Which one is it? What do you mean, all of them? If you, as an unbeliever, hold that the only thing that exists are particular experiences, then you can't say that a word applies to many things. A word can only apply to one thing at a time.
He is fighting a straw man here. He's assuming that somebody is saying that the only thing that exists are the experiences themselves, but nobody is actually saying that. Besides, if it's something that we can interpret, how would it not be an experience? He's arguing against an assertion that hasn't even been made to try to make his point.
When unbelievers use general concepts like duckness or hoarseness or goodness, for that matter, they are not talking about something that they have experienced.
These are just adjectives and concepts, though. We point to them to describe things. He does seem to have plenty of experience with arrogantness, though.
Now, you're going to say, wait a minute, they have experience, because they've experienced, through observation, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. Ah, that's true. But what they have not experienced is duckness. And you know how I know they have not experienced that? Because this is not very pleasant, but you could make dinner out of Huey, Dewey, and Louie, but you can't make dinner out of duckness.
So we can't experience it, or it isn't coherent, or we don't understand it because we can't make dinner out of an abstract concept? How much sense does that make?
And so when unbelievers talk about general concepts, they need some worldview that makes human experience intelligible. You need to ask, what view of the world makes meaningful your discussion of concepts or universals like duckness?
Well, the dictionary shows the definition of duckness is the quality of being a duck. Now we can look at different variables that we can quantify that would equal to quality. We could set a goal or an ideal for what the best possible outcome could be for quality in this context. Unless you're starting with nonsensical presuppositions, I don't see how one worldview has an advantage of making sense of these abstract concepts over another. I can just as easily say, how can you possibly make sense based on a theistic worldview of something demonstrable like evolution when you have presuppositions that are in direct conflict with what the facts of reality actually are?
Duck is just then the language itself, rather than an immaterial concept. And I want to show you how easy it is to refute this point of view. Let's assume that this written up here on the board is duckness. All right, you all know the concept of duckness, and it's right there on the board. There goes duckness. It don't exist anymore. If the unbeliever seriously believes that concepts are nothing more than the physical airwaves that we hear audibly or see with our eyes, a physical thing written down, then what you need to do is you need to point out that if we eliminate those physical objects in the world, then there is no more concept of duck.
The concepts exist when we describe them and interpret them. They aren't like a physical thing that you can touch that exist in the physical realm. Mathematics don't really exist either, but we use them to describe the reality that we experience, that we see and explain. That's so we can have a mutual understanding of what these things mean and what we're referring to when we mention them. It's just like love not existing without a brain and a mind, which is controlled by the brain, to interpret things. It's oxytocin and dopamine that are a physical reaction in the brain. As far as we can actually tell, things like love don't actually exist without a mind to interpret them.
When I teach philosophy, I have a lot of fun with new students by asking them, what is their name? Okay, and let's say we have a student who says his name is Jim, and then I'll ask him, is that your name? Yeah, that's my name. Seriously, that's your name? You don't want to be more precise? No, that's my name. What are you getting at? And I say, well, if that is your name, you're now nameless.
Now that's just silly. You can't just write a name on the board, erase it, and say, now you're nameless. We use names as labels to identify people and things, and to describe concepts.
And so there is a concept of Jimness, if you will. There is a name that goes beyond anything in the physical world and anything in experience that can be observed in a sense-based fashion.
Well, that is quite the assumption and assertion, and I have no idea how he arrived there exactly, or how he would demonstrate that that's actually true. From what we can actually tell, we do live in a physical universe that is guided and predicated on the laws of physics that are natural. Even black holes are governed by the laws of physics.
And so it is with duckness and love and justice and any number of things. Concepts are not material objects. Concepts are abstract in character, abstract and universal.
I don't understand the obsession with abstractions and concepts and immaterial and universals. To be universal and conceptual and immaterial, well, I can say that I have universe-creating pixies living in my underwear drawer that are also the arbiter of all that is moral. Morality comes from the pixies that are living in my underwear drawer, and I know because I feel it in my balls. Even your senses are dependent on my pixies, so you have to actually borrow from my worldview in order to even hear this. Just the mere fact that you are listening to me speak right now means that your worldview is wrong. Christian believers are unbelievers of pixies, and so therefore they don't understand the theology of pixiness, so they couldn't possibly comprehend worldly things like what is metaphysical, the logical absolutes, abstract concepts. These things are completely foreign to a God believer, because the pixies are the arbiter of all of these things.
But you see, the problem is, in a materialistic philosophy, where everything that exists must be material, there can't be anything that is abstract and universal, because everything must be particular and physical. Which is to say, the unbeliever can't even make sense of his talking and his reasoning. Now, you know what unbelievers do? Then they try to come up with more sophisticated theories which are behavioristic in nature. What they want to say is, well, words are understood in terms of stimulus-response mechanisms.
This guy probably doesn't even realize that he's actually borrowing from my worldview and drawing energy from my pixies in order to make sense of the idea that he can tell me that I can't make sense based on my worldview.
Let's talk about something a little more abstract even than duckness and names. Let's talk about the laws of logic. The laws of logic are meant to regulate human reasoning, the way in which we draw conclusions from premises.
That's absolutely right. And these concepts could have been kept confidential and all to ourselves of the pixie worshippers. But Christians had to steal the energy that created all of it.
Now, if you maintain that there's nothing that exists except the material world, the physical world about us, then what are laws of logic?
This is really just a big straw man argument, though. I don't know anybody that is a naturalist, materialist, that says that maintains that abstract concepts don't exist, that everything is only physical reactions. Some things we can't see, we can't actually touch. They aren't tangible, but they do exist as concepts. However, they don't exist if a mind doesn't exist. They are necessarily brain and mind dependent. If brains didn't exist, then these concepts wouldn't exist. They are simply things that we label to make sense of things and make comparisons.
Unbelievers want to appeal to them. You'll hear them tell you you're being illogical, or you need to take a course in logic, or you need to reason more logically.
Yes, somebody might tell you that you're being illogical if you are actually indeed being illogical. And if you want to have sincere dialogue with somebody and be intellectually honest, then you should be able to admit your mistakes. And if you are being illogical, then you should fix those mistakes, learn, and move forward with a better understanding of how these things work. Without knowing it, he is actually drawing power from my pixie, so he is actually the unbeliever. There are a lot of false idols that try to mimic the stature of the pixies.
It makes sense to call on people to be logical, because in so doing, they imitate the very nature of God. They think the way God thinks. They are consistent. God doesn't lie. He is true to himself. God is logical. And I need to think in a way that reflects the character of God. So it makes sense for the Christian to call on people to be logical. What sense does it make for the unbeliever to call on people to be logical?
The only reason that he's able to be logical is because the pixies are the foundation of logic to begin with. Of course, the nature of pixies is logical, and therefore we're just mimicking the nature of the almighty pixies. Hopefully by now you realize that I'm joking, I'm being sarcastic, because that is how it sounds to me. There's no actual reason or demonstration that these things are actually true, or that it's anything more than pure conjecture and logically fallacious nonsense.
What are the laws of logic? I've had people tell me, well, they're just, the way your brain thinks. You say, wait a minute. The laws of logic are the way that the human brain thinks.
No, the logical absolutes are abstract concepts that we point to as a foundation for all logical thought. The law of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle are foundational truths that we can contrast true statements with in order to determine what is actually true, because you need truths to affirm other truths. They serve as a foundational basis for mathematics, and even people that don't realize it are using the three laws of thought, or the logical absolutes. They are absolutely necessary as a foundation for objective truth. Even in another universe, actually in all possible universes, they would still be true. Even if you wanted to debunk them, you would have to first assume that they are true in order to try to prove that they are not true. I think that sufficiently demonstrates their objective usefulness, and at no point does anybody need to, as far as we can actually tell, appeal to the creator of the universe in order to be able to use them or to make sense of them. That is just nonsense.
Well, if the laws of logic are the way the human brain thinks, then we don't need laws of logic to correct the way the human brain thinks, do we? Obviously, the laws of logic are not simply a description of the function of the brain, or it wouldn't make any sense to take courses in logic, so you can learn to think more logically.
This is just a big old fat argument from ignorance saying, I don't understand how this works, so it couldn't possibly be true. So in conclusion, I think what he's really saying is he shouldn't be taking the energy from my pixies and using them for his own personal self-gain to tell people that don't believe in his God couldn't possibly think rationally, couldn't possibly form coherent thoughts, and even if they did, it doesn't make any sense because they don't have a foundation for their logical thought, so therefore they're just idiots. This really sums up apologists really well, though. Unfortunately, that doesn't this attitude that he has doesn't exactly foster an environment where people can actually ask questions and get a better understanding of what everybody else thinks and make comparisons to see who is correct, who isn't, and where errors might be. Instead, he just asserts that he has some ethical and moral high ground and doesn't ever show why or how that actually is. I didn't really edit this, so it could have been much more succinct, and I'm a little disappointed with how quickly I did it. I'm not going to take the time to go through every single point and elaborate on everything, but if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them the best that I can. And let's keep the conversation going.